Welcome to our channel, where emotions, secrets, and untold love stories come alive. Tonight, we invite you into a journey that will touch your heart and stir your soul. True love never ends? This real story will shock you. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, share it with those who believe in love, and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next chapters of these unforgettable stories. Every click of yours is a way of supporting us to bring more emotional, dramatic, and inspiring tales to life. Now, let's step into the world of Isabella Moore, Ethan Carter, and Richard Hale, where love, desire, and destiny collide in ways no one could ever imagine. The first notes of the evening drifted through the grand hall like threads of silk, weaving into the air, invisible yet impossible to ignore. Chandeliers glimmered above polished marble floors, scattering golden reflections across gowns and tuxedos. Isabella Moore stood near the edge of the ballroom, her champagne glass tilted delicately between her fingers, though she had barely taken a sip. Her smile was polite, the kind one wears when the world expects them to be dazzling, but her eyes betrayed a quiet distance, as though her soul were gazing far beyond the crowd. Richard Hale, her fiancé, towered beside her with a hand resting possessively on her back. His presence was commanding, the kind of aura that filled space and silenced hesitation. At 42, he carried his wealth like an invisible crown, speaking in tones that demanded respect, his laughter deeper and louder than those around him. He leaned in to whisper something to a colleague, leaving Isabella suspended in the fragile silence of her own thoughts. She nodded at acquaintances, smiled when appropriate, yet beneath the facade her heart remained unmoved, untouched by the grandeur she was surrounded with. And then it happened. She turned, almost absently, her eyes scanning the room in search of air, of something less suffocating than the polished perfection around her. That was when her gaze caught his. Ethan Carter stood on the far side of the hall, a half-shadow near the edge of the balcony where the golden light did not quite reach. He wasn't dressed to outshine anyone, yet his presence demanded notice, not by force, but by the quiet intensity that lingered in his stillness. His dark suit carried none of Richard's grandeur, but the way it fit his lean frame made it seem effortlessly perfect. His eyes, though, were what held Isabella still, dark, unflinching, carrying a weight she could not name, and a vulnerability that made her breath falter. The glance lasted no more than a heartbeat, but it was enough. A spark flickered, subtle, forbidden, and deeply unsettling. She felt as though he had seen through the veil she wore, the polite smiles, the careful posture, straight into the unrest that churned within her. Richard's hand pressed firmer against her back, and she blinked, breaking the invisible thread. She looked away, forcing a smile at someone who passed by, but her pulse had already betrayed her calm. Later that evening, when Richard excused himself to join a circle of powerful men in discussion, Isabella allowed her feet to carry her away from the crowd. She wandered through the tall glass doors onto the terrace, where the night air brushed against her skin like a secret. The moon hung above the city, casting silver light across the garden below. She inhaled deeply, letting the coolness steady her restless thoughts. "You don't seem to enjoy parties." The voice came from the shadows, deep but soft, a tone that carried more honesty than charm. Isabella turned, startled, and there he was, Ethan Carter, no longer across the room but a few steps away. His features were sharper under the moonlight, shadows tracing along his jaw, his eyes darker still yet impossibly alive. She hesitated, fingers tightening around the glass she still held. "There. Exhausting sometimes." He tilted his head slightly, as though studying her words. "Exhausting," he repeated, as if he understood far more than she intended to reveal. Silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It carried weight, thick with an unspoken recognition neither could dismiss. She tried to look away, to anchor herself on the distant hum of laughter spilling from the ballroom, but her eyes betrayed her, returning to him as though bound by gravity. "You're Isabella Moore," he said finally. It wasn't a question. Her brows arched. "You know me?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Everyone here knows you. The fiancée of Richard Hale. The future Mrs. Hale." He paused, the words carrying a trace of something unnameable, not mockery but not admiration either. "And you are?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Ethan Carter." His answer was simple, but there was something behind it, something he didn't offer freely. She turned the name over in her mind. Carter. She had heard it once, maybe twice, in murmurs about business projects Richard had invested in. Yet Ethan's presence didn't match the conversations. He didn't radiate hunger for power, nor the polished arrogance of those who hovered around Richard. Instead, he carried an air of solitude, of a man who walked his own path, even if it was lined with shadows. "Should I congratulate you?" he asked, his gaze flickering to the ring that sparkled faintly on her finger. Isabella swallowed. The diamond glimmered coldly under the moonlight, a symbol of everything secure, everything proper, everything she should want. Yet under Ethan's eyes, it felt heavy, almost like a shackle. "Yes," she said finally, her tone clipped but fragile. "It's what people expect." The corner of his mouth curved, not quite a smile, more like an understanding neither of them dared voice. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the faint music drifting through the open doors, muffled and distant, as though it belonged to another world entirely. Isabella's breath quickened against her will. She should go back inside, she should find Richard, she should not linger here. And yet, her feet remained anchored, her heart betraying the logic in her mind. Ethan's eyes didn't move from hers, and she felt exposed, as though every carefully hidden doubt was laid bare before him. "Do you believe it?" he asked suddenly. She blinked. "Believe what?" "That true love never ends." Her lips parted, caught off guard by the rawness of the question. Of all the things he could have said, of all the polite exchanges that belonged to evenings like this, he had chosen something that cut through every facade. She searched for words, but none came. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know." For the first time, Ethan's eyes softened, the intensity dimming into something almost tender. "Neither do I," he said quietly. The sound of footsteps from the ballroom shattered the fragile silence. Isabella turned sharply, her heart leaping, but it was only a pair of guests stepping onto the terrace, their laughter echoing into the night. When she looked back, Ethan had already stepped further into the shadows, his figure blending into the darkness as though he had never been there at all. Richard's voice called her name from inside. Strong, authoritative, a voice that claimed her without question. She straightened, adjusted her gown, and returned to the warmth of the hall, her face composed, her smile intact. But her heart carried the echo of a glance, a question, and a name that refused to leave her mind. That night, long after the party had faded into silence and Richard's steady breathing filled the vast bedroom, Isabella lay awake. The chandelier's reflection flickered faintly against the ceiling, but her eyes were fixed on the memory of dark eyes under moonlight. She touched the ring on her finger, feeling its weight press against her skin, and for the first time she wondered if the life she was walking toward was the one she truly desired. And somewhere in the quiet, a whisper repeated itself in her mind, a question she could not silence. "Do you believe that true love never ends?" Morning arrived not with peace but with a restless heaviness that clung to Isabella Moore as she stood before the tall mirror in her dressing room. Pale light seeped through the curtains, casting silver edges on her reflection. Her eyes, ringed with the faintest trace of sleeplessness, betrayed the truth she had tried to conceal. She had spent the night replaying a question that should never have been asked, a glance that should never have been held. True love never ends. Did she believe it? She could not answer, and the silence of her own heart was deafening. Richard Hale entered the room with the same commanding presence that filled every space he occupied. His tie was perfectly knotted, his watch gleamed with quiet power, and his gaze settled on her not with affection but with ownership. "We have lunch with Mrs. Whitmore this afternoon," he reminded her, his tone brisk. "She has influence with the foundation board. It will be important for you to leave a good impression." "Of course," Isabella replied, smoothing the fabric of her dress, her voice steady though her chest constricted. She knew the performance expected of her, graceful, intelligent, charming in a way that reflected well upon him. She had mastered this role, yet this morning her soul resisted. For the first time, the mask she wore felt unbearably heavy. Richard leaned in, brushing her cheek with a kiss that was more formality than affection. "You're radiant, as always," he said, before exiting with the certainty that she would follow his plan. Isabella exhaled slowly, pressing her palms against the dressing table. Her thoughts betrayed her, slipping back to the terrace, to the shadows. To Ethan Carter's eyes that had seen her not as an accessory to a powerful man, but as a woman trembling beneath the weight of choices unmade. She whispered his name once, under her breath, as though the sound itself was dangerous. The day unfolded with the rhythm of obligation. The luncheon at Mrs. Whitmore's estate glittered with conversations of influence and investments. Isabella played her part, answering questions with practiced poise, laughing when appropriate, yet all the while she felt the hollow echo of her own words. Mrs. Whitmore's sharp eyes lingered on her longer than necessary, as though probing beneath the surface. Isabella sensed suspicion, though she had given no reason for it. No reason except the restless flicker in her gaze, which betrayed a longing she could not name. It was later, when Richard excused himself to join a private meeting, that fate drew its next thread. Isabella, wandering momentarily away from the cluster of guests, entered the library in search of quiet. The scent of aged leather and polished wood wrapped around her, and the hush of the room was a relief. She moved along the shelves, her fingertips brushing spines, when she heard the faint creak of the door behind her. "Miss Moore." The voice halted her breath. She turned, and there he was, Ethan Carter, standing in the doorway with the same quiet intensity that had unsettled her the night before. His presence seemed almost unreal, as though her thoughts had conjured him, yet the weight in her chest assured her this was no dream. "Mr. Carter," she managed, her tone carefully even. "I didn't expect to see me here," he finished, stepping into the room, the door clicking softly shut behind him. His movements were unhurried, but each step seemed deliberate, closing the space between them with an invisible force. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharper now, a defense against the flood of emotions his presence stirred. "Business," he replied simply. "Richard and I have overlapping interests." The mention of Richard's name should have steadied her, should have reminded her of boundaries that could not be crossed. Instead, it only deepened the tension, as though speaking it aloud underscored the danger of standing here with him alone. Silence settled, heavy and charged. Isabella's heartbeat quickened, her palms damp against the fabric of her dress. She wanted to move, to step away, but her feet betrayed her, holding her rooted as Ethan's eyes found hers again. "You didn't answer me last night," he said softly. Her breath caught. "Answer what?" "Whether you believe it," he said. His gaze lingered, searching her face. "That true love never ends." Her throat tightened. She had tried to bury that question, to silence its echo, yet here it was again, spoken into the air where it could no longer be denied. She turned away, forcing herself to look at the rows of books, their spines orderly and unyielding. "Why do you ask me that?" "Because," he said, his voice closer now, "you looked as though you were searching for an answer you didn't have." She closed her eyes briefly, the honesty in his words striking deeper than she wished. "And do you?" she whispered. He did not reply immediately. When she turned to face him, she found him watching her with a depth that unsettled her core. "I once believed it," he said finally. "I lost someone who made me certain of it. But now..." His jaw tightened, his gaze flickering with a shadow of pain. "Now I don't know if love ends, or if we simply bury it until it feels like it has." The air between them thickened, their unspoken truths weaving together into something dangerous. Isabella's chest rose and fell more quickly, her body betraying the composure she tried to maintain. She wanted to speak, to bridge the fragile space between them, but the creak of footsteps in the hall shattered the moment. Ethan stepped back instantly, his expression shuttered, his posture returning to that of a polite guest. The library door opened, and Mrs. Whitmore entered, her sharp gaze sweeping across the room. Her eyes narrowed slightly at the sight of Isabella and Ethan, though she said nothing beyond a courteous greeting. Still, Isabella felt the weight of suspicion settle like a stone in the room. After polite words were exchanged, Ethan excused himself with a nod, leaving Isabella alone with Mrs. Whitmore, who studied her with unnerving scrutiny. "You seem distracted, my dear," the older woman remarked, her tone light but edged. "I'm only tired," Isabella replied quickly, forcing a smile. Mrs. Whitmore's gaze lingered a moment longer before she turned away, yet Isabella knew the seed of doubt had been planted. That evening, as the carriage carried her and Richard back through the city, Isabella stared out the window, her reflection ghosting against the glass. Richard spoke of business, of future plans, of expectations, but his words washed over her like distant waves. Her thoughts remained in the library, in the silence between words, in the shadow of a man whose presence both frightened and electrified her. Later, when Richard left again for another meeting, Isabella found herself alone in the vastness of their home. She wandered through the rooms until she stood on the balcony, the night air brushing against her skin. Below, the city hummed with life, but all she could hear was the echo of a question, the memory of eyes that had looked at her not as a symbol, not as a possession, but as a woman aching beneath the weight of her choices. Her heart pounded as she whispered into the night, "What am I doing?" Behind her, the sound of the front door closing announced Richard's return, his footsteps steady, certain, grounding her once more in the life she had chosen. But even as she turned to greet him, her soul trembled with a truth she could no longer deny. Something had begun, something fragile and dangerous, and it would not be silenced. The rain fell in sheets against the tall windows of the Hale residence, a relentless rhythm that filled the silence of the room where Isabella Moore sat alone. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil within her, wild, ungovernable, and impossible to ignore. She pressed her fingers against the cool glass, watching droplets chase one another downward, her reflection fractured and uncertain. Richard was away again, another late-night business meeting, another set of obligations that drew him further from her with every passing day. Yet his absence brought no relief, for it was in these quiet hours that her thoughts betrayed her, wandering inevitably back to Ethan Carter. His voice, his eyes, the way he spoke of love as though it were a wound and a salvation all at once, it haunted her. A knock startled her. She turned, expecting perhaps one of the servants, but it was Clara Bennett who entered, shaking rain from her coat. "I had to see you," Clara said, her tone brisk yet concerned. "You've been avoiding me, Bella." Isabella tried to smile, but it faltered. "I've been distracted." Clara crossed the room, her eyes narrowing as she studied her friend. "You look as though you're standing at the edge of something dangerous. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise." Isabella lowered her gaze, her hands tightening in her lap. "I don't know what to do, Clara." "Then tell me the truth," Clara urged, sitting beside her. "Is it Ethan?" The name hung heavy in the air, undeniable. Isabella closed her eyes, a tear slipping free despite her efforts. "I never meant for it to happen. But when he looks at me, it's as though he sees me. Not who Richard expects, not who society approves of. Just me." Clara's expression softened, though worry shadowed her eyes. "And what of Richard?" "He offers everything, stability, protection, status. But no warmth, no passion. I thought it was enough. I told myself love wasn't necessary. But now," she broke off, her voice trembling. "Now I don't know if I can go through with it." Clara took her hand gently. "Bella, true love is a dangerous thing. It can lift you higher than the world allows, or destroy everything you've built. Are you ready for the cost?" Isabella could not answer. The silence between them was filled with the storm outside, a reminder that choices made in the dark could reshape lives forever. Later that night, after Clara departed, Isabella found herself drawn once more to the balcony. The rain had eased, the city glistening beneath the glow of lanterns. She stood there, shivering slightly, when a shadow detached itself from the street below. A figure, familiar, undeniable, looked up at her. Ethan Carter. Her breath caught. Against all reason, against all fear, she descended the stairs and stepped out into the night. The damp air clung to her skin as she approached him, her heart thundering. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "I had to see you," he replied, his voice low, urgent. "I can't pretend anymore, Isabella. Every time I walk away, I feel as though I'm leaving behind the only thing that makes life bearable." Her resolve crumbled at his words, her body trembling as though torn between flight and surrender. "Ethan, if Richard—" "I don't care about Richard," Ethan cut in, though his voice cracked with pain. "I care about you. Tell me you feel nothing, and I'll leave. But if there's even a part of you that feels what I do, then let's stop lying to ourselves." The night held its breath. Isabella's lips parted, but before the words could form, another voice shattered the fragile moment. "Isabella." She froze, turning to see Richard Hale standing in the shadows of the courtyard, his expression unreadable, his presence towering. He had returned earlier than expected, and now the truth lay exposed beneath the storm's fading light. The silence that followed was unbearable. Richard's gaze moved from Isabella to Ethan, then back again, a flicker of understanding dawning in his eyes. "So," he said at last, his tone cold, measured. "This is the distraction I've sensed." "Richard," Isabella began, but her voice faltered. "Save it," he snapped, though his control did not break. "I should have known. You never truly belonged in this world, Isabella. You're too easily swayed by illusions." Ethan stepped forward, his jaw set. "She's not an illusion. She deserves to choose." Richard's eyes narrowed, his voice dripping with disdain. "And you think you can offer her what I cannot? A life of uncertainty, poverty, scandal? You mistake passion for permanence, Carter." The words cut, but Isabella's heart surged with defiance. "No, Richard. You mistake possession for love." The declaration hung in the air, shocking even herself. For the first time, she had spoken the truth aloud, and its power trembled in her chest. Richard's face darkened, but he did not lash out. Instead, he turned away, his shoulders rigid. "Very well," he said coldly. "If you believe in this so-called love, then follow it. But know this, Isabella, society is not kind to those who betray its rules. You'll lose everything." He left without another word, his footsteps echoing into the night. The courtyard was silent once more, save for Isabella's ragged breathing. Ethan reached for her, his touch tentative yet desperate. "You chose," he whispered. But even as his arms wrapped around her, she felt the weight of Richard's words pressing down. The cost of this love would be immense. Scandal, exile, perhaps ruin. Was she ready? In the days that followed, the consequences unfurled swiftly. Whispers spread through circles of power, Mrs. Whitmore fueling them with pointed remarks. Invitations dwindled, doors closed. Isabella felt society's judgment like a noose tightening around her neck. Yet through it all, Ethan remained, steady, vulnerable, offering her not wealth or security, but a love that burned with truth. One evening, as they sat together in the modest cottage where Ethan now lived with his brother Oliver, Isabella finally asked the question that had haunted her. "Do you believe it now?" She whispered, "That true love never ends." Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with both sorrow and fierce devotion. "If it does, then it was never true. And if it's true, then no force in the world can kill it." She pressed her forehead against his, tears slipping free. In that moment, she knew the answer she had sought all along. True love was not safe, not easy, not without sacrifice. It was raw and dangerous, demanding everything. And yet, it was the only thing worth giving everything for. Years later, long after the scandal had faded into whispers, Isabella and Ethan walked hand in hand along a quiet path, their lives simple but full. Clara remained her confidant, Oliver his anchor, and though society had cast them out, they had built a world of their own, fragile, imperfect, but true. Standing beneath the fading light of a sunset, Isabella turned to Ethan with a soft smile. "They said true love never ends," she murmured. "And they were right," he replied, his fingers tightening around hers. For in the end, the story was not of loss nor of ruin, but of the enduring power of a love that had defied expectation, shattered chains, and proven itself eternal. True love had not ended. It had begun anew.